Welcome to the Boise Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I'm the Reverend Sara LaWall. It is my great honor to serve this beloved community, and we are so glad that you have joined us this morning. For those of us who are joining us for the first or second time, the newcomers among us, we are delighted to have you. Thank you for checking us out in this virtual time. We invite you to introduce yourself in the chat so we can warmly welcome you, and also to fill out our newcomer form, and we'll post a link to that in the chat so that we can keep you posted about all that is happening in our fellowship. And friends, this is just a reminder that there is so much happening. All the details to all the ways that you can connect and learn and grow and be in community together are on our website. When we gather each week, we like to offer up and land acknowledgement, a recognition that the land upon which our church and homes exist is the ancestral land of the Shoshone-Bannock peoples and the Paiute peoples who inhabited a vast region of Idaho and much of the surrounding area. And this is a recognition of the long history of our land, long before colonization, before Native communities and people were rounded up and forced to leave. And we offer this recognition as an uncomfortable truth. And in our discomfort, call ourselves to action, to deeper relationship with Native leaders and communities, to bringing about justice in every way that we can, to listen to their needs and their calls and give them back the resources they need to heal their communities. I'm going to take a moment here to just remind everyone to please mute yourself. There's a little bit of extraneous noise out there. So this week has been quite a week. And the events at our Capitol have left me weary and heartbroken and disappointed. So I am especially grateful to gather together with all of you in community this morning and to share a space for bringing all that we are carrying, a space for reflection and spiritual nourishment, a space to feed your soul, a place to invite joy and love and hope to also take. Our spiritual theme for this month is imagination, that place from which new visions, dreams, and creative endeavors emerge. After the insurrection at our Capitol, imagination might feel dormant or gone, buried under the weight of it all, but still it beckons. Imagination is but one of many spiritual practices we will need to live in to a vision of a new emerging world. This year in 2021, we mark the 60th anniversary of the merging of Unitarianism and Universalism, the imaginative emergence of our beloved religious tradition. It also marks a 60-year anniversary for us right here at the Fellowship, when a small group of Unitarians who had been gathering together in people's homes decided to make it official and sign the papers to become an incorporated, officially recognized religious organization 60 years ago this spring. I wonder if they could ever have imagined the thriving fellowship we would become, and the imagination they must have held and cultivated to create such a community and to pledge themselves to its growth and future is inspiring for all of us. As we move through this year toward a hopeful big celebration of this milestone, perhaps just in time for in-person gatherings to resume, we're going to carve out a little bit of time each month to share with you small moments of our history in honor of the legacy that they created, honoring their imagination. So today I invite us all to welcome imagination, to live in that space, to get comfortable there, that space where creativity and possibility thrive. Let us take a moment to breathe together. Fill your body with breath. Let that breath release some of what you are carrying with you this morning, if only for a moment. Breathe knowing that when we breathe, we do so connected to one another and to this wider community of faith, hope, and love. And as you hear the words of our opening poem, I invite you to hear them as a balm for your weary spirit. Thou art the song of my heart in the morning. Thou art the dawn of truth in my soul. Thou art the dew of the roses adorning. Thou art the woven whole. Thine is the grace to be steadfast in danger. Thine is the peace that none can destroy. Thine is the face of the need-driven stranger. Thine are the wings of joy. Thou art the deep, to the deep in me calling. Thou art a lamp where my feet shall tread. Thy way is steep past the peril of falling. Thou art my daily bread. Thine be the praise of my spirit uplifted. Thou art the sea to each flowing stream. Thine be the days that are gathered and sifted. Thou art the deathless dream. We sing to conjure the joy and hope, the light and love, the faith and the commitment we need in these times. Music feeds us, grounds us, and sustains us for the journey ahead. Please join us in singing the beautiful hymn by Jason Shelton, Morning Has Come.
On-being podcaster Krista Tippett once asked theologian Walter Brueggemann about his seminal book, The Prophetic Imagination, and about how he equates the prophets of the Bible with those whom today we call poets, prophetic poets, like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Brueggemann shared this insight.
The two things that are important, it seems to me, are on the one hand, these prophets were rooted in covenantal traditions. The other thing is that they are completely uncredentialed and without pedigree. So they just rise up in the landscape. The way I put it now is that they imagined their contemporary world differently, according to that old tradition. So it's tradition and imagination. There's no way to explain that, so we explain it by the work of the Spirit. But I don't think you have to say that. I think they are moved the way every good poet is moved to have to describe the world differently according to the gifts of their insight. And of course, in their own time and in every time since, the people that control the power structure do not know what to make of them. So they characteristically try to silence them. What power people always discover is that you cannot finally silence poets. They just keep coming at you in threatening and transformative ways.
So, in the spirit of imagining our contemporary world differently and in transformative ways, we will light our chalices. Our flaming chalice represents that gift of insight, the prophetic voice of the poets that challenge the people who control the power structure. Each week we ask a child to light our chalice because it is for them that our traditions need to be reimagined and brought forward to serve the future. As Sylvia and Ted Squire light their chalices, we invite you to light yours at home, and then in the chat, announce where it is that you light your chalice. Come, let us worship together.
I invite everyone to cozy up for our time for all ages this morning. Who remembers the words to our fifth principle? It's right in the middle, so it's hard to remember off the top of my head. But they are, we believe that all people have a say, especially in the matters that concern them. Children and also youth, have you ever been part of making a really big decision? And I'm talking bigger than deciding what to have for lunch or where or what park you go to play. I'm thinking deciding how many parks are in your neighborhood or what's inside of the park to play with. Have you ever decided how to use 50 or 500 or $10,000 to take care of people or animals or plants? It's a lot of money, huh? Our service today is exploring the importance of using our voices and our power to make decisions to build a better, more just and kind world. When we fight to make a world more just, we are at our most powerful when we focus on everything we want to say yes to, how we want to spend that $100. That's a yes. It's a really big yes. And it takes a lot of imagination to choose what to say yes to and then follow through. So I want to frame this. We're going to begin our story right in the middle of something. Something really important happens before our book begins. The children in our story got together and they demanded that their voices and their decisions be listened to. It's true in our story and it's true in real life. Children and youth and everyone of all ages, what you want to say yes to, what you want more of matters. So what do you want to say yes to? What do you want more of? And what action do you have to take to make it reality? Our story this morning is by Jacob Kramer, and I added some illustrations by Sara Walsh. When the children claimed power, we all agreed. More bats. More bats, free bats, bats to flutter and to swarm. Bats in every nook and every cranny. Bats to darken the summer sky. Do you know the names of any bats? We have Vesper bats and horseshoe bats, long-eared bats and short-nosed bats. What do you think we have to do to make sure there's more bats? Well, children in our story planted flowers and fruit trees and grapes for the bats to eat. That's an important start. What do bats eat? They let the grass grow very long, so there's more little bugs crawling around for the bats to eat. We stayed up past bedtime to watch them dive and squeak, and still we demanded more bats. Fruit-eating bats and bug-eating bats. Even blood-eating bats. Here, come on. About to drink the blood of this cow. Bats beyond number and bats for days. Some people were worried about rabies, and so we arranged for free medicine so no one would get sick. Okay, what else do we need in order to bring about more bats? Well, what about their houses? The attics were getting full. And so we built more attics and houses. The bats were thirsty, so here's some thirsty bats. So we built more parks and we made more ponds. They're already changing a lot in their town. Do you think these decisions only help the bats? Who else does it help to have more parks and more houses? The bats kept bumping into walls because they don't have very good eyesight. They use their ears to navigate. So they're bumping into walls. And so we tore down the walls. The big walls that are just in the way. Some people were afraid of bats, and so we held classes about getting to know our new bat neighbors. And it involved hands-on activities Bats are sweet. You need to calm down and stroke them gently so we don't startle them. The bats the bats began to look hungry. What do you think happens when bats are hungry? They fight over their peaches and their bugs. They needed more food, but we were running out of mosquitoes and peaches. And the adults had a concern. Who is going to grow the food? There are people that don't even have enough food. It's a really important question. So the children looked around and we decided that things must be changed. We disbanded the armies and the navies so that soldiers would become farmers and the tanks became tractors. Look at this guy. He's concerned over this pig that's in the way. And the battleships became research vessels in order to search out for new islands with new and interesting bats. Okay, these kids have made really big changes. They focused on helping the bats, but lots of people were helped. Do you think their decisions will help the bats out for very long? And I wonder what they're going to do next. Here's a hint. More whales. I wonder if you got together with your neighbor kids and the kids from your school, who would you want to help, and all your kids and neighbor kids, who would you all want to focus on helping first? One of my votes would be for beavers. I think beavers are very important, but maybe you and your neighbors would vote for helping immigrants and refugees, helping bees, more bees. Maybe you would choose ways to address racism so that Black Lives Matter is more than a saying. I want to invite our children to join me after the service. People of all ages are welcome. And we're going to share and talk about what we want to say yes to. I invite everyone to join me in singing our children's recessional, which today is we will sing in the spirit of a blessing for this multi-generational community full of lovers of learning. Blessings.
Sometimes we cannot imagine that we can affect the world, that we can create beloved community. Sometimes we despair that it is all beyond us. But when we give, we demonstrate our faith. We say yes to supporting this congregation and all of its ministries. We say yes to realizing in our actions, the 8 principles we say we value. We say yes to our community partners, and this month we give our support to Learning Lab, an organization that exists to empower those who imagine better lives for themselves and their children through the power of literacy. The offering will now be gratefully received.
Blake, we're not getting the sound on this video. Would you mind restarting?
One seed is all it takes to grow a forest. One candle can light a dark room. One voice is enough, speaking words of love. Each moment becomes what we choose. Do you want a new world? A world that works for everyone? Open your heart and let it be. We can become the new world. Mother Earth beneath the sky. She's waiting for you and for me. Our dreams light the path for us to walk on. Our songs help our spirits align. And each little child helps remind us why we not only might, we must thrive. For everyone, open your life and let it be. We can become the new world. Mother Earth beneath the sky. She's waiting for you and for me to be a new world. Just this thought, it has begun. Now don't you wanna see a new world? In Mother Earth beneath the gray sky, counting on you and me to be a new
Amen. What a beautiful song. It's one I've been listening to on repeat this week as I've been preparing for this service and needed something to turn to in the struggle that this week has been for so many of us. The events of Wednesday, while not altogether surprising, ripped open a wound many of us thought was just beginning to heal. It was one thing to imagine something like this happening. Many of us did and even talked about it, but watching it play out in front of our eyes and unfold was entirely different. And it left me reeling and wrestling with my own reactions and wounded spirit. From friends and colleagues and many of you, I've heard words like violation, trauma, grief, anger, contempt, hopelessness, despair, and rage. An unusual rage that perhaps we haven't felt in a while. And the experience left me feeling agitated and unsettled and all of those other things. And so I want to offer a space to just acknowledge all the feelings, all the complicated, conflicting feelings, and to give us a space to feel them in whatever form they take and however they show up for you, in wherever they're showing up in your body. And not to push them down or to try to ignore them, but just to let them reside with you in your spirit, to notice where they are. Fear and rage can reside together without consuming us. At an interfaith prayer service on Thursday, spiritual activist Valerie Carr spoke of her own rage as a woman of color, and also as the sister-in-law of one of the reporters that were locked in the Capitol. She reminded us that this experience of rage is not bad or wrong, and we must allow ourselves to feel it. It is not the murderous, vengeful rage that we saw at the Capitol, but a spiritual unrest, what Valerie calls divine rage. The rage of Jesus when he overturned the tables of the moneylenders in the Capitol. The rage of the Hindu goddess Kali, who battles demons in order to protect her people. And the aim of divine rage is not vengeance, but to reorder the world. Because the events of this week remind us of the deep cracks and wounds in the foundation of our society and its structures and systems that are fed by a decaying worldview. So our task is to harness and channel that energy of divine rage into creative, nonviolent action. It's time to recreate and reimagine and rebuild with a whole new foundation, guided by a vision of emergence, a way of noticing systems and patterns that arise out of a multiplicity of events in self-organizing ways that feed off of connection and intersections, off of experimentation and risk-taking and failure. And that definition of emergence is a definition that was brought together from the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, Nick Oblansky, and Susan Beaumont. Shortly after the 2016 election, our own Sue Chu invited me to participate in a community group who came together to both process the outcome of the election and begin conversations about how we wanted to create a new vision and a new narrative for our community and beyond. What initially brought us together was a profound sense of grief for our country and the turn it had taken. But what we realized is that that grief birthed a hunger for a new way of being. A hunger that had long been growing inside all of us, that perhaps lives inside any of us who seeks to right injustices in the world. But a hunger that was inherent in the work that we were doing in our community and in our commitments in our lives. And in the midst of the constant barrage of injustice and indignity we were witnessing at the hands of our government, that hunger felt overwhelming. So we would meet together monthly in community. Much like a church, we would breathe together and share with one another. And it reminded us of that power of being in community, that none of us has all the answers, but each of us has gifts to contribute. And we oriented ourselves toward a commitment to choose all of us, a commitment to collective thriving. Our conversations helped us recognize that for far too long, people on the margins had been focusing on survival, and those of us in those sectors that have been addressing injustices had been focusing only on survival, on individual rights, on overturning injustices and solving the problems of our community. All of these things are worthy of attention, but somewhere along the way, we began to articulate that humanity deserves better than mere survival. And fueled by our hopes and dreams and endeavors, we imagined a vision of a world where all would thrive in community together. This vision arose out of centering the voices and lived experiences of those directly impacted by the forces of fear, hate, and violence that was growing around us. Those who had marginalized identities and who'd been subject to lifetimes of oppression and trauma. And the vision we claimed and imagined and borrowed and co-created with so many others in the world, scholars and activists and theologians, feeling this pull, this emergent worldview, it offered this hopeful contrast to what many began to see as a decaying worldview. I want to share with you a graphic that encompasses some of this emergent worldview that we were articulating and working with. As you look through it, I invite you to read some of those phrases aloud to yourself so you can hear yourself saying things like water is sacred, water is life, resilience, the spirit, our well-being is connected. You might notice some ideas here that have been long articulated in justice movements, both old and new, in religious and spiritual communities. This emergent worldview comes from all of those places, from theology and psychology, from sociology and justice work, from deep ecology and environmentalism. And when I first saw this graphic, I thought to myself, this is Unitarian Universalism. This is the very same vision we express in our faith tradition, in our theology, and in our communities, and in our principles. And one learning that has begun to take root in light of this emerging worldview is that we cannot continue to employ the tools and practices and structures of our dominant culture, which have historically led to oppression, domination, hyper-individualism, all those things that are antithetical to the vision expressed in this graphic, that we can't use those old patterns to bring forth a wholly different emerging world. This new emergence requires our collective imagination, creative, innovative shifts in our being and doing. Simultaneous to these community of purpose conversations, activist and author Adrienne Marie Brown published her book, Emergent Strategy: Shaping Change and Shaping Worlds. Her book took this vision and expanded upon it, offering practices and tools as a roadmap for bringing it to life. Brown's premise stems from noticing all the patterns and events that shape us, which in turn shape our relationships to one another and to our society. So emergent strategy becomes about shaping those patterns in our own lives as a way to impact systemic change. Brown reminds us that we have lived through a good half-century of individualistic, linear organizing, led by charismatic individuals or budget-building institutions, which intends to reform or revolutionize society, but falls back on modeling the oppressive tendencies against which we claim to be pushing. In these last months, as the pandemic has progressed and our lives and the life of this fellowship shifted dramatically, and particularly as the reckoning with white supremacy takes deeper root among us, I kept returning to emergent strategy for inspiration, for tools and a roadmap, feeling that pull to the changes that we're asking to be made in my own world and in the world around us. And in Adrienne Marie Brown's pages, I found all of these threads of connection with my work, with our faith, with the community, and the constant changes surrounding us. And I began to recognize how the systems that surrounded my life felt at odds with the spiritual aspirations of my faith and my ministry. Our cultural systems are fed by deep-seated beliefs and practices that center authority, hierarchy, capitalism, constant growth, production, extraction, exceptionalism, self-preservation, all of which shows up everywhere, even in the systems of our fellowship, despite our values to the contrary. And there is almost this magnetic pull towards those beliefs and how they are the only way to create change. So Brown invites a meditation, in a way, reflected in the moving of the natural world that reminds us of our deep interwoven connections, that interdependence. And from that, she reminds us that change begins in the smallest spaces in our lives, moment by moment, relationship by relationship, pattern by pattern. She says how we can intentionally change how we live in ways that grow our capacity to embody the just and liberated worlds we long for. I want to share with you just a few principles of emergent strategy. We're going to put them up on a slide. Small is good and small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. The changes we make in the smallest spaces of our lives and in our organizations will gradually allow us to grow and model and invite changes on a larger scale. A small example might be if this emergent worldview honors collective, collaborative leadership, then how might we be able to shift away from hierarchical leadership, especially in our own small spaces of organizational life, even here at the church? We have to model that vision internally as well as expressing it externally. Brown uses the natural world example of fractals, never-ending patterns that repeat themselves, each small part possessing the same characteristics of the whole, that we are reflecting and putting out what we want that whole to be. Change is constant. Be like water. Water doesn't automatically stop when it encounters an obstacle. It finds a way through. Intentional adaptation is paramount. We've been living this one out recently, this adaptation and change. It's been a refreshing adventure of experimentation, and I hope it's one that we will embody and hold on to even as we come back together in person. Brown suggests that we as individuals can develop our capacity for adaptation by evaluating our default reactions to change and whether those reactions create the space for opportunity and possibility and continuing to move our vision forward. She shares the natural world example of a murmuration of starlings. The hundreds of starlings is how they move through space in sync with one another, sharing leadership, constantly communicating and shifting their pattern. Each individual bird focuses attention on their 7 closest neighbors and thus manage larger flock cohesiveness. Another principle is that there is always enough time for the right work. That there is a conversation in the room that only these people in this moment can have. Find those conversations. In this principle, relationship is central, and interdependence and decentralization are key. Allowing time for work to unfold and emerge, and notice what is unfolding and emerging in the small spaces on its own, like the children who knew there should be more bats and imagined their way into making it a reality. She shares the natural world example. Again, we can turn to that natural world example of starlings and their movement in sync with one another, focusing on their nearest neighbors. Move at the speed of trust. This one sounds intuitive. It sounds like it's something we might easily be able to practice, but it's so hard because we've been conditioned to produce at maximum speed for maximum profit or outcome or result in the nonprofit world. So moving at the speed of trust invites us to meet people where they are, to support processes of transformation and restoration over result-oriented production and punishment. The speed of trust almost always slows things down, but the outcomes are much richer and more expansive with plenty of room for growth and adaptation. I know that my default personality certainly leans toward impatience when it feels like things are moving too slow or I am not seeing, quote, results. But rarely does that impatience produce anything deep and meaningful. Often the result is shallow, one-sided, and lacks imagination. Failure, never a failure, always a lesson. In emergence and emergent strategy, failure is ever present, but is never wrong. This is one of my favorite principles, but perhaps the hardest to practice. When we embrace failure, really truly embrace failure, we create room for and come to expect experimentation, innovation, and iteration. I've noticed that the fear of failure permeates so much of our lives. And when we allow that fear to drive our choices, we eliminate imagination and we become more distrustful, and then experimentation grinds to a halt. Embracing learning when things go wrong gets us closer and closer to discovering what works. Again, I think of our story, More Bats, and how the children learned and adapted from each obstacle handed to them by the grown-up people. Each potential failure became a pivot point toward their goal. What do you pay attention to grows. Here, the invitation is to feed the health, feed the love, feed what is working, to know your own strengths and passions and get out of the way for others to share theirs, to have creative energy for a project when you don't. Our society has certainly modeled for us excellent practices of constant critique. And it really can be an exhausting place to be in when you're trying to cultivate imagination and experimentation. We're so good at pointing out the flaws of something, particularly those things that are not ours. But doing so is still giving attention to it. Instead, we can invite ourselves to let go, to find ways to encourage, to express gratitude and support, and more than anything else, love. Despite my years-long orientation towards spiritual growth and the work of ministry, I am only beginning to scratch the surface of these principles of emergent strategy and put them into practice. Because I know that doing so requires letting go of some long-held ingrained practices and structures, even those that might live under the cloak of the democratic process. And there are so few examples to follow. But like the prophets and the poets, emergence invites us to imagine our contemporary world differently. And when I sit with those ideas and this emergent vision of our world, my imagination comes alive, sparking with creative ideas, and I'm more open to creative exchange. I think back to the depth of imagination it took this fellowship's early founders when they signed that formal paperwork almost 60 years ago. How they saw their own emergence, but also knew this valley needed a place to bring forth the world that was emerging for them in their time. The emergent world is always calling. May we embrace it full of hope, full of creativity, adaptation, growth, and always with the fullness of our collective imagination. Amen. In the practice of sharing our joys and sorrows, of sharing the depth of our lives with one another, that practice in any context embodies many of these emergent principles: trust, relationship, depth, presence, learning. And in that practice, our hearts can open and love pours in, reminding us that imagining the world is a collective endeavor, that we are not alone on this journey. Others are here to journey alongside us, to bless us with their care and presence. So let us let the love pour in. I have a few joys and sorrows to share with all of you as we begin. We extend our love and care to Robert Franklin, whose beloved Aunt Sandra died last week from COVID-19. She'd been in a nursing home for some time, but she and Robert had a special relationship, and he was able to see her a few times before she died. We extend our love and care to Tony Corley, who was recently diagnosed with breast cancer and had surgery just before the holidays. She is recovering. And to Gary White, who had bladder cancer in July, and recent scans show nodules on his lung. Gary will have a biopsy soon to determine a course of treatment, and he is grateful for all of the love and support he has received from this community. There is much love and blessing to go around. You are invited to share your joys and sorrows in the chat as we receive the healing music from our music director, Carrie Bastian. Amen. Thank you, Carrie. That song was a perfect capstone in this moment. In the living of life, we carry so much hope and promise alongside pain and grief and sometimes rage. And when the big things happen that shake us at our core, we're left sometimes adrift, bereft, uncertain what to do and what to say, how to get up and begin again. These are the moments when prayer beckons, when stillness beckons, when imagination beckons us to get quiet, to go deep, to listen and receive the whispers of the Spirit, the universe, of our hearts. I invite you to join me in the spirit of prayer, which we will follow with a short guided meditation practice. This prayer is from Matthew Taylor. Spirit of life and love, holy mystery. Rage is an act of revolutionary love. And so we love this country too much to go back and to be complacent, to be comfortable. And we ask ourselves, and we ask our gods, goddesses, and godex, how do we let hope out? How do we let hope out? How do we let hope breathe when we can't? We hold loss. We hold fear. But we are not alone. We are together, one with another, praying together, one to another, praying for our souls, for peace, and for our country. May we rise above this moment and bring forth a better world. Let us take some time to breathe together. Breathe in, feeling the air enter through your nostrils, filling your body with more spaciousness. Exhaling and releasing whatever is holding on, wherever it is holding on in you. To find that breath, that source of life. And as you're able and comfortable, I invite you to put your thumb and forefinger together. Gently press on the pads of your finger and rest your arms wherever they are comfortable. They can be in your lap or on your chair. And tune in to the pulse of your own heartbeat. As you breathe, feel your heart beat in your chest and your fingers. Feel it sending that circulation throughout your whole body. And on your next few breaths, I invite you to center those breaths in the place of your heart, to breathe through your heart. Inhaling, filling yourself up with whatever it is that your spirit needs in this moment. Exhaling, through your heart. Exhaling all that you wish to send out into the world. Breathing in peace through your heart. Breathing out love. Amen. As you come back into your space, I invite you to come back with that sense of heart breath, of open-heartedness. And just see how long you can keep that openness and space for yourself today. And of course, you're invited to come back to this practice anytime you feel the need to connect with your heart, with that source of love that surrounds all of us. If rage is an act of revolutionary love, then let us, in this moment of emergence, when our imagination beckons, let us have the courage to welcome those sometimes uncomfortable feelings, and the imagination to turn them into the fuel for turning the tide of our future. Our closing song today is a beautiful rendition of Blessed Unrest by Zoe Toby from the music director at Foothills UU Church, the Reverend Christopher Watkins Lamb.
Oh, I am waking up to find my world between the dying and being reborn. I see what is and I see what could be. Can't close my eyes again. go back to sleep. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. How can I change our course? Just a lonely voice. Wish I could lose myself in all the noise. But if we all would rise, a generation proud with a mighty song, we could turn this world around. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Ancestors all behind, and before me every child. I bring the power of a long unbroken line. So when our time is through, I want to know we did what we came to do for the future ones. So in our darkest days, may we all be strong and give our lives so light may go on. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide. Fill my days with blessed unrest, and my nights with dreams of justice. Make me a vessel for the turning of the tide.
Friends, I invite you to join me in our closing blessing by placing your hand on your heart. I want to share my gratitude for all who made the service today possible, for Debra Smith serving as our celebrant, Blake McCallum as our tech host, and of course our amazing worship staff, Carrie, Bastian, our music director, Emerson, Paige, our RE coordinator, and Nancy Harms and Patty Nakaoki, our ushers this morning. May we become the poets and the prophets, imagining a new emerging world, never silenced, a world for future generations, pursuing creative dreams of justice, love, and thriving for all of us. May we be vessels of divine rage, blessed unrest, and revolutionary love. Blessed are we all. Go in peace.
you.